Okay, hey, we're going to knock out chapter 20 here for you guys. Get my share screen up so you can see what we're looking at. And then hopefully that will get you guys through the second test. I hope these videos are helping you out a little bit. And everybody's doing well. I think so far, there's only so far in the course, haven't had any great issues. So here we go. Politics of the Gilded Age. And so really what the Gilded Age is going to be is just this time period from is that time period of the late 1800s where you start to see the industrial wealth of the United States start to increase and be consolidated into the hands of very few people. The term is actually coined by Mark Twain. And gilded metal basically is a less valuable metal that has more valuable metal, a very thin layer of more valuable metal put on the outside of it. Think of it kind of as like trophies, like athletic trophies are typically plastic, or they're, some very, very cheap form of metal. And they have that gold look to them, but if you scratch that gold off, you realize that it's not really gold. And so if you're looking at the economy of America in the late 1800s, you're going to think everybody's doing really, really well, because all of a sudden all these people are making lots of money. You have Rockefeller and Carnegie and the railroads, and everybody's making money. And how come not everybody's rich? Well, the reality of the situation is very few people are rich. They're making lots and lots of money, but they're making money off of the labor of others. And so you see the political cartoon here on our slide, where the masses are holding up, these very few people. I can't really identify them there. It's pretty pretty grainy cartoon, but I'm going to guess this is Gould, Jay Gould, who is a railroad tycoon. This might be JP Morgan over here on the left. On the right, Carnegie possibly. I don't know. Anyways, very wealthy people. Not everybody's wealthy, right? And one of the reasons that we have this issue of I don't know if we have an issue. Like, one of the reasons that we have an issue where wealth gets consolidated by a very, very small number of people is that we have a string of presidents that just aren't very strong. Nobody wins the majority of the popular vote, right? So nobody wins over 50%. Each one comes into the office with some kind of deficit against them. And the majority of them are one-term presidents. We go from Hayes, who serves for 4 years, to Garfield. And then you go Cleveland, Harrison, and then back to Cleveland again. And so it's just not a very stable period of American politics. And so the stability is going to come from businesses. And when that happens, typically businesses are going to take advantage of the situation. You have a spoil system still in effect, where people are going to be rewarded for political patronage. And so if you work on, Grover Cleveland's presidential campaign, you're going to be rewarded with a presidential job in his administration doing something. So we have that. Weak political leadership. We have the assassination of President Garfield. That's going to really highlight the need for civil service reform, right? Charles Gatto, he was a supporter of Garfield. He gets overlooked when government appointments are handed out. Gatto is not very stable. He's, to put it mildly, he has a screw loose, and he said that God told him to kill the president, and so that's what he went out. And did in a train station. Okay, and so we start to see the early stages of the civil service reform take place. And remember, the spoil system really came about with Andrew Jackson. Jackson put all of his supporters in key government positions. And so like, hey, you're going to support this guy, and we're going to ride his coattails all the way to the top. We set aside 10% of the government jobs to be filled by civil service exams, which isn't a ton, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And future presidents could always increase this, but they couldn't shrink it below 10%. And you look back to like Tammany Hall. I believe we talked about them in chapter 19. I want to say we did. In which you have corrupt local politics, and that the corrupt local politics are just going to corrupt local politicians are just going to become corrupt national politicians, and it's just how it works. Okay, so you're going to have problems for farmers. Farmers are going to be working super hard, and as I said a lot in the West, they're going to feel like they're being taken advantage of by big business in the East. And so big business during this time frame is really going to become the enemy of the small guy. It's going to become the enemy of the grassroots political organizations. It's going to become the enemy of the farmers, and it's going to ride that wave right up until the First World War. And so one of the things you see during American history is, or all history, is you see these waves where, all right, big business is bad, 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 bad. Then all of a sudden you have World War I breakout, and all of a sudden America and the world needs mass production of goods to win the war. And so, all right, now all of a sudden World War I, we outproduce the we outproduce Germany and Austria-Hungary, and we win, right? And so big business becomes the hero of the day. And then you end up with the period of the roaring 20s. And then of course what happens? Well, then like the stock market gets manipulated, and the little guy gets taken advantage of again. And then bam, big business becomes a villain until World War II. And then you start to see the swings back and forth. But anyway, so getting back to these slides, problems for farmers. In the late 1800s, farmers are going to have lots of problems because of tariffs. The United States doesn't have a high enough population to really set a favorable food rate for or price of food for farmers that are growing things out in the West. And even if they did have a big enough population, people aren't getting paid a ton of money to work in the factories in the East. And so these business owners in the East, they're producing goods. Farmers aren't making any money, and so they can't really sell these things to farmers, or they do, but whatever. But they want to sell them overseas, but they want to make sure that that farmers aren't getting better deals elsewhere. And so big business in the East is putting high tariffs on machines that are made in Europe or overseas to ensure that farmers have to buy their product. But in response to that, other places are going to put tariffs on exports from America. And so the American farmers feel like they're getting squeezed, because not only do they have to pay a higher price for American-made manufacturing goods, but then they also can't sell their crops abroad for a fair market price. And so farmers get doubly hit right there. Okay. Railroads are going to get better prices to larger businesses, right? And they're going to charge smaller farmers outrageous prices because, again, big business can do lots more volume. And so we start to see the power of government get behind this and start to regulate some of this stuff. You see the Interstate Commerce Commission put together the ICC, in which the federal government can now see interstate commerce due to the powers of the Constitution. There's really no enforcement powers behind this creation, but this is the first time that the president, this is one of the first times that you're going to see the president and the administrative branch, or the executive branch, I'm sorry, start to expand their powers. We talk about weak presidents and strong presidents during this time. If we were in a more traditional lecture class, we would talk more about individual presidents and are they a weak president? Do they support the idea of the presidency having more power, or do they support the idea of like Congress being more powerful? And we've had a string of weak presidents. I mean, like Jefferson's a relatively weak president, doesn't do anything that the Constitution doesn't want him to do. Jackson's a little bit of a stronger president, right? So by the time you get to 7th, 8th, 9th president, all the power's starting to increase. All of a sudden we get to Cleveland, and Cleveland starts to build that power of the presidency a little bit more. And by the time you get to Kennedy in the 1960s, they're going to use this power to regulate interstate commerce, to desegregate busing. And so like those powers are going to grow exponentially over time. But it also becomes, and so like some people look at that and say, hey, it's bad that one organization within this 3-branch system has so much power. And then other people will look at it and say, well, yeah, but like, look, in the 60s when they're using that power for good to deregulate, segregation, or bring it into racial inequality, or those types of things. And so there's definitely some give and take there that you have to establish over time. Okay, one of the problems that's going to face farmers is the fact that there's no money in America. There's just no paper money. The United States is on a gold standard, in which every dollar that is in circulation, paper money or coin that's in circulation, has to be backed by gold held in reserve by the United States government. And so the value of money is very, very high, which is awesome if you're loaning money, because you're loaning a very expensive dollar and you're going to get paid back probably a dollar that's even more expensive. If you think of money not as $1, but you think of money like what it will buy. So if money buys a candy bar, a dollar buys a candy bar, and you have inflation, that same dollar now doesn't buy a candy bar. It might buy 3/4 of a candy bar. So the buying power of money diminishes. If you have deflation, that means the buying power of money goes up. And so that one candy bar, so I'm borrowing $1 from somebody and I can buy one candy bar with that. But if we have a situation where we have deflation, all of a sudden that dollar can no longer only buy one candy bar, but that dollar buys 2 candy bars. Now I have to pay the bank back at the dollar that will buy more candy bars than I was able to do. And that might be a little bit confusing. You might have to watch that or reach out to me if you have questions. But basically what farmers are trying to do is farmers really, to work in agriculture, you have to borrow money. So you borrow money for the seed or whatever in the spring, you plant it, you harvest it, you take that in, you sell it at market, you hope you have enough money to pay back the bank and then keep what's left, right? Farmers are borrowing money for land, to buy equipment, blah, 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 right? And what they want to do is they're borrowing very expensive money. They look around and they're like, look, if we could also just all of a sudden introduce silver into the economy, then we could borrow this expensive money and pay back cheaper money. And so we start to push for the introduction of silver. You have this the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which puts like 4 million ounces of silver into circulation each month, which it helps out a little bit because it creates more money, but it's not enough to really, it's not enough to make a huge change. This is roughly the time, the late 1890s, where The Wizard of Oz is written. And some people will say that The Wizard of Oz is a political satire in which Dorothy and her counterparts, who are supposed to be political icons of the day, leave the breadbasket of Kansas as progressives, and they go to Oz, which is Washington, D.C., and they march on the yellow brick road, which is made of gold, right? But in the book, Dorothy has silver shoes. And when they turned it into a movie, the silver didn't show up as well. And so they turned them into the ruby slippers. But in the book, Dorothy walks all the way to Washington, D.C., or to Oz with the silver shoes. So there we go. Okay, one of the problems for farmers, another problem for farmers, overproduction. One of the ways that they try to make a buck is they try to get more food grown on land. Well, if they grow more food, then all they're doing is driving down the prices. And so it's counterproductive to actually grow more when what they should be doing is growing less. That's a problem. Solutions for farmers is they start to form political parties, or at least just like even social groups. They formed something in 1867 called the Grange, which works to form like cooperatives and pool resources. And they would actually throw huge Grange parties in which they would gather all these farmers together and allow them to talk and meet with new people and discuss new farming techniques. And it was a way to kind of end some of the boredom of farm life. And they start to get into politics. And they win some local elections. They win some state representative seats, and they start to push for railroad laws that are more favorable to farmers. They start to push for the availability of paper money, which are called greenbacks. If you're familiar with Kansas high school athletics, Pratt High School are the greenbacks, and part of the reason that were chosen, that mascot was chosen, was because of the progressive movement that really begins here in the breadbasket in Kansas. So the Grange has a little bit of success from the late 1860s, but by the late 1880s, they'd fallen out of favor, and they're going to be replaced by other groups. The first one is going to be the Farmers Alliance, and that is the one that is really going to get kickstarted here in Kansas. Basically what they're going to do is they're going to form, there used to be like Southern alliances and Northern alliances, and what they would call the Color Alliance, which are just different organizations within farming. And so, the South would talk about cotton or cash crops, and the North would talk about wheat or whatever. And then you would have black farmers, right? But the racism is really going to split up this group. But what the Farmers Alliance is the first one to really do is form a national organization in which farmers kind of almost unionize and work together. But there's roles for women, there's roles for minorities. And this is really going to come out of Kansas. We have Mary Elizabeth Lease, who is a frontierswoman in the state of Kansas. And a little quote there: Wall Street owns the country. It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government for Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street. So, like, I don't know if that sounds familiar to lots of people, but I think that kind of rings familiar to a lot of political banter we hear now. Okay, so the Farmers Alliance kicks along. They want inflation. Again, and why do they want inflation? They want inflation because they want to pay back expensive loans with cheaper money. They want fair railroad prices. They want a national bank owned by the government. So they want a government bank, a Bank of America. And to be honest, they probably would have gotten all three of these if they wouldn't have shot the moon for this sub-treasury plan. And this is where they get a little bit radical. And it's funny because Kansas used to be so progressive. Like during this time frame, Kansas was out on the front of what a lot of people would look at as almost like socialist type rhetoric when it came to agriculture. And then and then in the 1930s, 1940s, you see the big switch. So federal government, basically the sub-treasury plan, basically what the Farmers Alliance wanted is the federal government would store crops. So you harvest your wheat crop, you take it to a government-owned grain elevator, right? And whatever the market price of that crop for that day, you could borrow 80% of that. And then the government would hold that for you until the price of your crop rose to a point that you would be willing to sell it. And so farmers could harvest crops and they could hold them for a year or longer, until the price for grain would rise, and then they could sell those at a higher price and then repay the government their initial loan. And this was just not politically acceptable at that time. Okay, so the Farmers Alliance is going to is going to kick around, and they're going to form. Oops, so where are we at? They're going to form their own political party, and they're going to call themselves the People's Party. But in reality, what they're going to be known as is the Populist Party. And so you hear like President Trump was referred to as a populist, right? Like was a politician of the people. And so really what it is, the idea of a populist is just running on a mirage of different, or a wide variety of different ideas that are popular to people across multiple fields, I guess, or just multiple social classes or multiple groups of people in the public, right? And it sounds like, well, all politicians do this, right? Well, and they do to a certain extent, but the People's Party or the Populist Party is the first one that's going to be formed. And really what they're going to do is they're going to take all of these major parties in the United States, and they're going to combine all of them together. So you're going to have the Farmers Alliance. You can see my little cartoon here. If you would blow it up, you see like the Farmers Alliance, the Prohibition Party, the Silver Party, the old Granger Party. So the Grange. You see socialists are in there. You see the Greenback Party, the Knights of Labor Party. So you're going to take this labor movement, these movements that deal with economics. You see communists and socialists. So you're going to see like people looking to reform the factories in the East. You see Prohibition Party, which is going to start to gain steam, where people are really worried about the alcohol consumption in the United States during this time. The Farmers Alliance, the Grange, organized labor, and we're going to slam them all together in this party, and we're going to hope that we can gather enough support that we're going to, kind of make a splash. And so in 1888, they're going to run candidates for president, they're going to run for Congress, for local and state governments, and they're going to win over 1 million votes, which is a huge number in 1888 for a third party candidate. And if you look down here on my little map over here on the right, they're actually going to carry some states, which would be unheard of for a third party candidate today. Probably the strongest third party candidate we've had in a long time was Ross Perot. Did Ross Perot, hold on. Hey, sorry, did Ross Perot get electoral votes in 1992?
Okay. I found this on the web for did Ross Perot get electoral votes in 1992?
Let's see what Suri had to say here. Yeah, and so like Ross Perot's been the strongest third party candidate of my lifetime, and he did not win any electoral votes, didn't carry any states, but he won almost 20% of the popular vote. Here you can see the Populist Party is going to carry Kansas with 10 electoral votes, if you notice that, right? Actually more electoral votes than California at the time. Colorado, Nevada. So a lot of these places, obviously Kansas and Colorado are going to be farm-based. North Dakota, again, farm-based, and they kind of split that. But then you have Nevada, which is very silver-rich, very wanting to get silver in the population or into the currency. And so all these places are going to have different motives for how they vote, and the Populist Party is going to be pretty successful. Okay, so 1888, we're going to go to the election of 1896, in which the Populists have begun to gain enough power that they're starting to gather the attention of the national parties, and the Populists are going to select William Jennings Bryant for president, and they're going to run him. And the Democratic Party is also going to do that. And so they throw their weight behind Bryant, who's going to actually kind of merge the Populist Party and the Democratic Party in 1896 to form the Democratic Party. And he's going to they're going to run on the ideas of a monetary system that is not based on gold. And he gives this famous speech called the Cross of Gold, in which basically he argues that America is going to be crucified on a cross of gold because they won't change their monetary systems, and we're just doing horrible things to poor people or to farmers out in the West. So you see this merging of the populist and the Democratic Party, and it's going to be the political end of the political party for the populists. Excuse me. Which, looking forward, are going to be seen as really kind of political failures. I mean, they kind of start off with a bang and then they fizzle out because they get absorbed. Well, and you're like, well, Mr. Lindstrom, why didn't more people vote for this, right? Like all these people out here in the West, that they like this idea of the populace or more money. Well, if you look at our electoral map of 1896, you're going to see that it's going to fall along traditional 1800s political lines, where the South is going to vote Democratic or vote for the Democrat, and the North is going to vote for the Republican. And during this time, again, industries in the North, the banks are in the North, and the banks are very, very concerned that if we go to a silver paper money system, they're going to get paid back with less valuable money than they loaned out. And so that's very, very troublesome for these banks. So that's where we are, 1896. We're going to come back and look at the election of 1900 and then 1904 and 1908 and see what we end up with. All right. So that's going to be the start of our political reform movement. And you have a test over 18, 19, and 20. Please use these notes if they're good for you. Go through, take your time on the with your textbook. Look up answers that you're not 100% sure of. And I look forward to grading those. We'll see everybody soon. Have a great night.